I've chosen three of Mark Twain's short stories to read to you this afternoon. The first of which is called The Story of the Bad Little Boy. Once there was a bad little boy whose name was Jim. So if you'll notice, you will find that bad little boys are nearly always called James in your Sunday school books. It was strange, but still it was true that this one was called Jim. He didn't have any sick mother either, a sick mother who was pious and had the consumption and would be glad to lie down in the grave and be at rest for the strong love she bore her boy and the anxiety she felt that the world might be harsh and cold toward him when she was gone. Most bad boys in the Sunday books are named James and have sick mothers who teach them to say, "Now I lay me down," etc., and sing them to sleep with sweet, plaintive voices, and then kiss them good night and kneel down by the bedside and weep. But it was different with this fellow. He was named Jim, and there wasn't anything the matter with his mother. No consumption or anything of that kind. She was rather stout than otherwise, and she was not pious. Moreover, she was not anxious on Jim's account. She said that if he were to break his neck, it wouldn't be much loss. She always spanked Jim to sleep, and she never kissed him good night. On the contrary, she boxed his ears and when she was ready to leave. Once this little bad boy stole the key of the pantry and slipped in there and helped himself to some jam and filled up the vessel with tar so that his mother would never know the difference. But all at once, a terrible feeling didn't come over him, and something didn't seem to whisper to him, "Is it right to disobey my mother? Isn't it sinful to do this? Where do bad little boys go who gobble up their good, kind mother's jam?" And he didn't kneel down all alone and promise never to be wicked anymore and rise up with a light, happy heart and go and tell his mother all about it and beg her forgiveness and be blessed by her with tears of pride and thankfulness in her eyes. No, that is the way with all other bad books, but it happened otherwise with Jim, strangely enough. He ate that jam and said it was bully in his sinful, vulgar way. And he put in the tar and said that was bully also, and laughed and observed that the old woman would get up and snort when she found it out. And when she did find it out, he denied knowing anything about it, and she whipped him severely. And he did the crying himself. Everything about this boy was curious. Everything turned out differently with him from the way it does to the bad Jameses in the books. Once he climbed up in Farmer Acorn's apple tree to steal apples, and the limb didn't break, and he didn't fall and break his arm and get torn by the farmer's great dog and then languish on a sick bed for weeks and repent and become good. Oh no, he stole as many apples as he wanted and came down all right, and he was all ready for the dog too, and knocked him endways with a brick when he came to tear him. It was very strange. Nothing like it ever happened in those mild little books with marbled backs and with pictures in them of men with swallow-tailed coats and bell-crowned hats and pantaloons that are short at the legs, and women with the waists of their dresses under their arms and no hoops on. Nothing like it in any of the Sunday school books. Once he stole the teacher's penknife, and when he was afraid it would be found out and he would get whipped, he slipped it into George Wilson's, poor widow Wilson, the moral boy, the good little boy of the village, who always obeyed his mother and never told an untruth and was fond of his lessons and infatuated with Sunday school. And when the knife dropped from the cap and poor George hung his head and blushed as if in conscious guilt, and the grieved teacher charged the theft upon him and was just in the very act of bringing the switch down upon his trembling shoulders, a white-haired, improbable justice of the peace did not suddenly appear in their midst and strike an attitude and say, "Spare this noble boy. There stands the cowering culprit." I was passing the school door at recess, and unseen myself, I saw the theft committed. And then Jim didn't get Vail, and the venerable justice didn't read the tearful school a homily and take George by the hand and say such a boy deserved to be exalted, and then tell him to come and make his home with him, and sweep out the office and make fires and run errands and chop wood and study law and help his wife do household labors and have all the balance of the time to play and get 40 a month and happy. No, it would have happened that way in the books, but it didn't happen that way to Jim. No meddling old clam of a justice dropped in to make trouble, and so the model boy George got thrashed, and Jim was glad because, Jim hated moral boys. Jim said he was down on them milksops. Such was the coarse language of the bad, neglected boy. But the strangest thing that ever happened to Jim was the time he went boating on Sunday and didn't get drowned. And that other time when he got caught out in the storm when he was fishing on Sunday and didn't get struck by lightning. Why, you might look and look all through the Sunday school books from now till next Christmas, and you would never come across anything like this. Oh no, you would find that all the bad boys who go boating on Sunday invariably get drowned. And all the bad boys who get caught out in storms when they are fishing on Sunday infallibly get struck by lightning. Boats with bad boys in them always upset on Sunday. And it always storms when bad boys go fishing on the Sabbath. How this Jim ever escaped is a mystery to me. This Jim bore a charmed life that must have been the way of it. Nothing could hurt him. He even gave the elephant in the menagerie a plug of tobacco, and the elephant didn't knock the top of his head off with his tongue. He browsed around the cupboard after essence of peppermint and didn't make a mistake and drink aquafortis. He stole his father's gun and went hunting on the Sabbath and didn't shoot 3 or 4 of his fingers. He struck his little sister on the temple with his fist when he was angry, and she didn't linger in pain through long summer days and die with sweet words of forgiveness upon her lips that redoubled the anguish of his breaking heart. Nope, she got over it. He ran off and went to sea at last and didn't come back and find himself sad and alone in the world as loved ones sleeping in the quiet churchyard and the vine-embowered home of his boyhood tumbled down and gone to decay. Oh no, he came home as drunk as a piper and got into the station house the first. He grew up and married and raised a large family and brained them all with an axe one night and got wealthy by all manner of cheating and rascality. And now he is the infernalist, wickedest scoundrel in his native village and is universally respected and belongs to the legislature. So you see, there never was a bad James in the Sunday school books that had such a streak of luck as this sinful Jim with the charmed life. The next story is called The Joke That Made Ed's Fortune. A few years before the outbreak of the Civil War, it began to appear that Memphis, Tennessee was going to be a great tobacco entrepot. The wise could see the signs of it. At that time, Memphis had a wharf boat. There was a paved, sloping wharf for the accommodation of freight, but the steamers landed on the outside of the wharf boat, and all loading and unloading was done across it between steamer and shore. A number of wharf boat clerks were needed, and part of the time, every day, they were very busy, and part of the time, tediously idle. They were boiling over with youth and spirits, and they had to make the intervals of idleness endurable in some way. And as a rule, they did it by contriving practical jokes and playing them upon each other. The favorite butt for the jokes was Ed Jackson, because he played none himself and was easy game for other people's. He always believed whatever was told him. One day he told the others his scheme for his holiday. He was not going fishing or hunting this time. No, he had thought out a better plan. Out of his $40 a month, he had saved enough for his purpose in an economical way, and he was going to have a look at New York. It was a great and surprising idea. It meant travel, immense travel. In those days, it meant seeing the world. It was the equivalent of a voyage around it in hours. At first, the other youths thought his mind was affected. But when they found that he was in earnest, the next thing to be thought of was what sort of opportunity this venture might afford for a practical joke. The young men studied over the matter, then held a secret consultation and made a plan. The idea was that one of the conspirators would offer Ed a letter of introduction to Commodore Vanderbilt and trick him into delivering it. It would be easy to do this, but what would Ed do when he got back to Memphis? That was a serious matter. He was good-hearted and always taken jokes patiently, but they had been jokes which did not humiliate him, did not bring him to shame, whereas this would be a cruel one in that way. And to play it was to meddle with fire. For with all his good nature, Ed was a Southerner. And the English of that was that when he came back, he would kill as many of the conspirators as he could before falling himself. However, the chances must be taken. It wouldn't do to waste such a joke as that. So the letter was prepared with great care and elaboration. It was signed Alfred Fairchild and was written in an easy and friendly spirit. It stated that the bearer was the bosom friend of the writer's son and was of good parts and sterling character. and it begged the Commodore to be kind to the young stranger for the writer's sake. It went on to say, "You may have forgotten me in this long stretch of time, but you will easily call me back out of your boyhood memories when I remind you of how we robbed old Stevenson's orchard that night, and how while he was chasing down the road after us, we cut across the field and doubled back and sold his own apples to his own cook for a hatful of donuts. And the time that we, and so on, bringing in names of imaginary comrades and detailing all sorts of wild and absurd and, of course, wholly imaginary schoolboy pranks and adventures, but putting them into lively and telling shape. With all gravity, Ed was asked if he would like to have a letter to Commodore Vanderbilt, the great millionaire. It was expected that the question would astonish Ed, and it did. "What? Do you know that extraordinary man?" "No, but my father does. They were schoolboys together, and if you'd like, I'll write and ask Father. I know he'll be glad to give it to you for my sake." Ed could not find words capable of expressing his gratitude and delight. The 3 days passed, and the letter was put into his hands. He started on his trip, still pouring out his thanks while he shook goodbye all around. And when he was out of sight, his comrades let fly their laughter in a storm of happy satisfaction, and then quieted down and were less happy, less satisfied. For the old doubts as to the wisdom of this deception began to intrude again. Arrived in New York, Ed found his way to Commodore Vanderbilt's business quarters and was ushered into a large anteroom where a score of people were patiently awaiting their turn for a 2-minute interview with the millionaire in his private office. A servant asked for Ed's card and got the letter instead. Ed was sent for a moment later and found Mr. Vanderbilt alone with the letter open in his hand. "Pray sit down, Mr. Jackson." Sit down, Mr. Jackson." By the opening sentences, it seems to be a letter from an old friend. "Allow me, I will run my eye through it." He says, "Why, who is it?" He turned the sheet and found the signature, Alfred Fairchild. Fairchild. I don't recall the name, but that's nothing. 1,000 names have gone from me. He says, hmm, hmm. Oh dear, but it's good. Oh, it's rare. I don't quite remember it, but I seem to. It'll all come back to me presently. He says, but that was a game. Oh, splendid, how it carries me back. It's all dim, of course. It's a long time ago, and the names, some of the names are wavery and indistinct, but sure, I know it happened. I can feel it. And Lord, how it warms my heart and brings back my lost youth. Well, 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 I've got to come back into this workaday world now. Business presses and people are waiting. I'll keep the rest for bed tonight and live my youth over again. And you'll thank Fairchild for me when you see him. I used to call him Alf, I think. And you'll give him my gratitude for what this letter has done for the tired spirit of a hard-worked man, and tell him there isn't anything that I can do for him or any friend of his that I won't do. As for you, my lad, you are my guest. You can't stop at any hotel in New York. Sit where you are a little while till I get through with these people. Then we'll go home. I'll take care of you, my boy. Make yourself easy. Ed stayed a week and had an immense time and never suspected that the Commodore's shrewd eyes were on him, that he was daily being weighed and measured and analyzed and tried and tested. Yes, he had an immense time and never wrote home, but saved it all up to tell when he should get back. Twice, with proper modesty and decency, he proposed to end his visit, but the Commodore said, "No, no, wait, leave it to me. I'll tell you when to go." In those days, the Commodore was making some of those vast combinations, consolidations of warring odds and ends of railroads into harmonious concentrations of floating and rudderless commerce in effective centers. And among other things, his far-reaching eye had detected the convergence of that huge tobacco commerce already spoken of toward Memphis. And he had resolved to get his grasp upon it and make it his own. The week came to an end. Then the Commodore said, "Now you can start home, but first we will have some more talk about that tobacco matter. I know you now. I know your abilities as well as you know them yourself, perhaps better. You understand that tobacco matter. You understand that I am going to take possession of it. And you also understand the plans which I have matured for doing it. What I want is a man who knows my mind and is qualified to represent me in Memphis and be in supreme command of that important business. And I appoint you, me. Yes, your salary will be high, of course, for you are representing me. Later, you will earn increases of it and will get them. You will need a small army of assistants yourself and carefully. Take no man for friendship's sake, but all things being equal, take the man you know, take your friend in preference to stranger. After some further talk under this head, the Commodore said, "Goodbye, my boy, and thank Alf for me, for sending you to me." When Ed reached Memphis, he rushed down to the wharf in a fever to tell his great news and thanked the boys over and over again for thinking to give him the letter to Mr. Vanderbilt. It happened to be one of those idle times, blazing hot noonday and no sign of life on the wharf. But as Ed threaded his way among the freight piles, he saw a white linen figure stretched in slumber upon a pile of grain sacks under an awning, and said to himself, "That's one of them," and hastened his step. Next he said, it's Charlie Fairchild. Oh, good. And the next moment laid an affectionate hand on the sleeper's shoulder. The eyes opened lazily, took one glance. The face blanched. The form whirled itself from the sack pile, and in an instant, Ed was alone, and Fairchild was flying for the wharf boat like the wind. Ed was dazed, stupefied. Was Fairchild crazy? What could be the meaning of this? He started slow and dreamily down toward the wharf boat, turned the corner of a freight pile, and came suddenly upon two of the boys. They were lightly laughing over some pleasant matter. They heard his step and glanced up just as he discovered them. The laugh died abruptly, and before Ed could speak, they were off and sailing over barrels and bales like hunted deer. Again, Ed was paralyzed. Had the boys all gone mad? What could be the explanation of this extraordinary conduct? And so, dreaming along, he reached the wharf boat and stepped aboard. Nothing but silence there and vacancy. He crossed the deck, turned the corner to go down the outer guard, heard a fervent, "Oh Lord," and saw a white linen form plunge overboard. The youth came up coughing and strangling and cried out, go away from here. You let me alone. I didn't do it. I swear I didn't." Didn't do what? Give you the, never mind what you didn't do. Come out of that. What makes you all act so? What have I done? You, why, you haven't done anything. But, well, then what have you got against me? What do you all treat me this way for? But haven't you got anything against us? Of course not. What put such a thing into your head? Honor bright, you haven't? Honor bright. Swear it? I don't know what in the world you mean, but I swear it anyway. And you'll shake hands with me? Goodness knows I'll be glad to. Why, I'm just starving to shake hands with somebody. The swimmer muttered, hang him, he smelled a rat and never delivered the letter, but it's all right. I'm not going to fetch up the subject. And he crawled out and came dripping and draining to shake hands. First one and then another of the conspirators showed up, cautious, armed to the teeth, took in the amicable situation, then ventured warily forward and joined the love feast. And to Ed's eager inquiry as to what made them act as they had been acting, they answered evasively and pretended that they had put it up as a joke to see what he would do. It was the best explanation they could invent on such short notice. And each said to himself, he never delivered that letter. The joke is on us. If he only knew it, or we were dull enough to come out and tell. Then, of course, they wanted to know all about the trip, and he said, right up on the boiler deck and order the drinks. It's my treat. I'm going to tell you all about it. And tonight, it's my treat again, and we'll have oysters. When the drinks were brought and cigars lighted, Ed said, well, when I delivered the letter to Mr. Vanderbilt, great Scott, gracious, how you scared me. What's the matter? Oh, or nothing. It was attack on the chair seat, said one. But you all said it. However, no matter. When I delivered the letter, did you deliver it? And they looked at each other as people might have thought that maybe they were dreaming. When they settled to listening, and as the story deepened and its marvels grew, the amazement of it made them dumb, and the interest of it, their breath. They hardly uttered a whisper during 2 hours, but sat like petrifactions and drank in the immortal romance. At last the tale was ended, and Ed said, and it's all owing to you boys, and you'll never find me ungrateful, bless your heart. The best friends a fellow ever had. You'll all have places. I want every one of you. I know you. I know you by the back, as gamblers say. You're jokers and all that, but you're sterling with the hallmark on. And Charlie Fairchild, You shall be my first assistant and right hand because of your first class ability and because you got me the letter and for your father's sake who wrote it for me and to please Mr. Vanderbilt, who said would. And here's to that great man. Drink heartily. Yes, when the moment comes, the man appears. Even if he is 1,000 miles away, it has to be discovered. Practical joke. This third story is called My Watch. My beautiful new watch had run 18 months without losing or gaining, without breaking any part of its machinery or stopping. I had come to believe it infallible in its judgments about the time of day and to consider its constitution and its anatomy imperishable. But at last, one night, I let it run down. I grieved about it as if it were a recognized messenger and forerunner of calamity. But by and by, I cheered up, set the watch by guess, and commanded my bodings and superstitions to depart. Next day, I stepped into the chief jeweler's to set it by the exact time. And the head of the establishment took it out of my hand and proceeded to set it for me. Then he said, "She's 4 minutes slow. Regulator wants." I tried to stop him, tried to make him understand that the watch kept perfect time. But no, all this human cabbage could see was that the watch was 4 minutes slow, and the regulator must be pushed up a little. And so while I danced around him in anguish and implored him to let the watch alone, he calmly and cruelly did the shameful deed. My watch began to gain. It gained faster and faster day by day. Within the week, it sickened to a raging fever, and its pulse went up to 150 in the shade. At the end of 2 months, it had left all the timepieces of the town far in the rear and was a fraction over 13 days ahead of the almanac. It was away into November enjoying the snow while the October leaves were still turning. It hurried up house rent, bills payable, and such things in such a ruinous way that I could not abide it. I took it to the watchmaker to be regulated. He asked me if it had ever been repaired. I said no, it had never needed any repairing. He looked a look of vicious happiness and eagerly pried the watch open and then put a small dice box into his eye and peered into its machinery. He said it wanted cleaning and oiling besides regulating. Come in a week. After being cleaned and oiled and regulated, my watch slowed down to that degree that it ticked like a tolling bell. I began to be left by train. I failed all appointments. I got to missing my dinner. My watch strung out 3 days grace to 4 and let me go in protest. I gradually drifted back into yesterday, then day before, then into last week, and by the comprehension came upon me that all solitary and alone, I was lingering along in week before last, and the world was out of sight. I seemed to detect in myself a sort of sneaking fellow feeling for the mummy in the museum and a desire to swap news with him. I went to a watchmaker again. He took the watch all to pieces while I waited and then said the barrel was swelled. He said he could reduce it in 3 days. After this, the watch averaged well, but nothing more. For half a day, it would go like the very mischief and keep up such a barking and wheezing and whooping and sneezing and snorting that I could not hear myself think for the disturbance. As long as it held out, there was not a watch in the land that stood any chance against it. But the rest of the day, it would keep on slowing down and fooling along until all the clocks it had left behind caught up again. So at last, at the end of 24 hours, it would trot up to the judge's stand just all right and just in time. It would show a fair and square average, and no man could say it had done more or less than its duty. But a correct average is only a mild virtue in a watch. And I took this instrument to another watchmaker. He said the king bolt was broken. I said I was glad it was nothing more serious. To tell the plain truth, I had no idea what the king bolt was, but I did not choose to appear ignorant. He repaired the king bolt, but what the watch gained in one way, it lost in another. It would run a while and then stop a while and then run a while again and so on, using its own discretion about the intervals. And every time it went off, it kicked back like a musket. I patted my breast for a few days, but finally took the watch to another watchmaker. He picked it all to pieces and turned the ruin over and over under his gaze. And then he said there appeared to be something the matter with the hair trigger. He fixed it and gave it a fresh start. It did well now, except that always at 10 minutes to 10, the hands would shut together like a pair of scissors, and from that time forth they would travel together. The oldest man in the world could not make head or tail of the time of day by such a one. And so I went again to have the thing repaired. This person said that the crystal had got bent and that the main spring was not straight. He also remarked that parts of the works needed soling. He made these things all right, and then my timepiece performed unexceptionably, save that now and then, after working along quietly for nearly 8 hours, everything inside would let go all of a sudden and begin to buzz like a bee, and the hands would straightway begin to spin around and around so fast that their individuality was lost completely. And they simply seemed a delicate spider's web over the face. She would reel off the next 24 hours in 6 or 7 minutes and then stop with a bang. I went with a heavy heart, one more watchmaker, and looked while he shook her to pieces. Then I prepared to cross-question him rigidly, for this thing was getting serious. The watch had cost $200 originally, and I seemed to have paid out 2,000 or 3,000 for repairs. While I waited and looked on, I presently recognized in this watchmaker old acquaintance. a steamboat engineer of other days, and not a good engineer either. He examined all the parts carefully, just as the other watchmakers had done, and then delivered his verdict with the same confidence of manner. He said, "She makes too much steam. You want to hang the monkey wrench on the safety valve." I brained him on the spot and had him buried at my own expense. My Uncle William, now deceased, alas, used to say that a good horse was a good horse until it had run away once, and that a good watch was a good watch until the repairers got a chance at it. And he used to wonder what became of all the unsuccessful tinkers and gunsmiths and shoemakers and engineers and blacksmiths. But nobody could ever tell him.